Hi, welcome to Gene Rants. I'm Gene. I'm guessing that a lot of you, maybe most of you, maybe even all of you know what a tell is, but just in case there's somebody who does not know what a tell is, it's a term used in poker when you have poker players sitting around a table and one person is betting. Well, what a tell is that somebody will look at his cards and sometimes he will do something unconsciously. Maybe he'll close his eyes, maybe shake his head just a tiny bit, or an eye movement, something that will alert other players whether that player has a good hand or a bad hand. That's what a tell is, where when somebody in poker unconsciously uh, shows what his hand is, shows what the truth is, what the reality is. That's what a tell is. But you sometimes see that in people too. It's known when you're talking about people talking, especially political parties or political, which is what we'll be talking about today, Democratic National Committee. But what is sometimes is called saying the quiet part out loud. In other words, saying something they don't want to say, but something that they say will actually be saying something else that they don't want us to know. They don't want other people to know. So that's saying the quiet part out loud. So it's also called a Kinsley gaffe. That Michael Kinsley was there was a show called Crossfire on CNN. Two people, a conservative and a liberal. He was a liberal debating, and he came up with something called the Kinsley gaffe, which is when a politician accidentally tells the truth, something that he doesn't want revealed. So that's what we're talking about. Now we all know what a tell is, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because Ken Martin, the leader, there was Ken Martin, he's the leader of the Democratic National Committee, and there was a 3-day meeting of the Democratic National Committee, the upper crust people, deciding, well, talking about how they're going to win the next election. And he said a couple of things that it shows me they're still in denial, but something that really is, it's not my job to help Democrats, but I guess I'm going to have to today because, well, here we go. Let me put up the headline, give you a couple of quotes. DNC, that would be Democratic National Committee chair, lays out losing Democrat strategy. During the recent gathering of Democrat Party bosses in Minneapolis, there was no shortage of deranged rhetoric, usually about the dark doings of the dictator Trump. But the most delusional diatribe was delivered by DNC chair Ken Martin, who unintentionally captured why Democrats have been unable to recover from their drubbing last November and why their prospects aren't much better moving forward. Martin opened the first session of the 3-day meeting with a predictably dull speech full of progressive platitudes and mangled metaphors that ended with this bizarre call to arms. The Democratic Party has to stop trying to win arguments over policy and politics and do more to win future elections. In other words, this phrase that you hear on the left, but you never hear it on the right, to my knowledge, by any means necessary. In other words, just win, just just gain power, do what you want to do. Don't bother convincing us through argument that what they want to do is right. Just win the election, which is what happened with Obamacare. Remember, any keep your own doctor, yada, yada, yada. Actually, he said he didn't give any intimation that he was going about Obamacare. He said something about health. I think he actually denied that he was talking about a comprehensive program like Obamacare. So this, you see, in the past, this is why they were losing arguments in the past, because they would pretend to be moderate and then they would win and they would be very liberal. And then the Biden administration was just about the most liberal that I can remember. I mean, yeah, it actually is the most left wing, the Biden administration, probably, as we were finding out, because there was an auto pen actually running the country, an auto pen used by these ultra far left zealots under him, under his staff, probably, as we're finding out, without his knowledge. I don't want to get off on that track. What I do want to talk about is that they're saying that don't bother trying to win the argument, just win the election. And I suppose, I guess they assume we'll all thank them. They'll, you know, they will enact their policies, ideally to them, without telling us, and we'll just be against our will, and then we'll just thank them because the policies will be so great. That's obviously what they're talking about. But what they're getting backwards is, I've quoted her a number of times, this particular quote, but Margaret Thatcher, she said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. That's the way, that's how you win the election, by winning the argument. And when you have Ken Martin, the chairman of the DNC, saying, no, don't, let's not win arguments about policy, let's just win the election. In other words, as I said, number one, by any means necessary, do whatever we have to do to win, which would include, as we saw with Obamacare, which would include lying, just denying that. If you're called on, if somebody says, are you going to do such and such that the American people don't want, just deny it. And just say, we would never do that. When you get into power, then do it. Try to do it. And ideally, to them, do it. And that's what Ken Martin is saying here. Don't win the argument, just to win the election. And we have now Trump, well, if he gets his way on paper ballots and voter ID, it's going to be very hard. And actually now Texas is doing the redistricting, and other states are doing. If every state that can redistrict does, the Republicans will pick up. They'll gain more seats. Cumulatively, they will gain seats, and because the Democrats have been redistricting for gerrymandering, I guess you could call it, for decades. They don't have that much left to gerrymander. I mean, as I mentioned in the past, Trump got 39% of the vote in Massachusetts. So, I mean, obviously he did not carry Massachusetts, but you would think that there would be at least one Republican district representing that 39%, almost half of the state. There are zero. There are no, there's not one Republican congressional district in Massachusetts, and other states have. Illinois is a classic example too, but other states. So there's nothing left to do. They've already. I mean, once you go to zero Republican seats in Massachusetts, I mean, how do you? Well, you can have -1 Republican seat. So you see, they're kind of stuck. But the Republicans now, it looks like they're just getting started. So Texas already did it. Governor Abbott, he signed it into law. They will hope, well, at least 4 seats, but possibly 5 seats from this redistricting. Ohio has to do it. Actually, a court struck down their current map, and they're required by a judge to redistrict. So they're going to do it, and they're going to do it to favor Republicans. And what they probably will do, this is something that it's almost like an aside, but it's related, because this is one of the reasons that the GOP was able to gain a lot of seats, was because the Democrats, because they wanted to make identity politics. So they wanted to create in various states majority minority districts. In other words, say majority black districts. So, well, because of to them, all black people vote the same way. So you would have, say, this district, like 3 or 4 districts that would be Democrat districts, because of they would have some black people in those districts, but which would be enough because they would vote mostly Democrat even today, though that's shifting slightly with this last election. But you'd have so if you're a a black person and you are a Democrat, you want Democrats to have as many seats as possible. But what happened was the Democrats identified by race and say, no, we must have a black majority district. And the Republicans, not surprisingly, because they're called the stupid party, but they're not called the that stupid party. So they worked with the Democrats. And what was the result? The result was that you pulled Democrat, black voters from here, black voters from here, black voters from here, black voters from here to consolidate and create a majority black district. And what happened to those four or three or four, however many districts that were Democrat? Oh, they became Republican districts. So they went from four or whatever. We'll just assume four because that was one case that happened, I believe. Four Democrat. Well, five altogether Democrat districts or four Democrat districts, and put them all and the four Democratic districts and one Republican district, we'll say. So they went from that to four Republican districts and one Democrat district. So this is how gerrymandering can come back and bite you. So I think that's what might be happening in Ohio, but then the Supreme Court just struck down. You cannot base districts on race. You can do redistricting in favor of party. Because the Supreme Court can't come in and just can't draw the districts for 50 states, and the state courts say they don't want to get into it usually. I think one state did it. I think it was New York might have redrawn their districts. I'm not sure, but the point is that the Democrats, they don't want to. This gerrymandering was one way to win instead of just having the districts fairly distributed by party, and then go into the Republican majority districts and by argument convince them to vote for the Democrat. So they don't do that. And then you have independent voters. You have the independent voters who can go either way. But the Democrats are saying now that they don't bother doing that. Don't argue about policy. And what was the other one? Don't argue about, drop my paper here. Don't argue about policy and politics. Just do more to win future elections. In other words, just figure out how to win. And I think that's a losing strategy because, as I said, if besides gerrymandering, the only other way is to cheat, which is basically what he's saying then. Well, just win. We have to win. Cheat. Get unlawful aliens to vote. That's one way. There are other ways, but then there is, since the 2020 election, where I believe a lot of this chicanery actually happened, you had court cases since then. And for instance, in Pennsylvania, where the election commissioner or some court, a lower court, ordered ballots to be counted that came in, mail-in ballots, which is where most of this mischief happens, mail-in ballots, which Trump would outlaw for national elections. Let's see, I don't know if he can do that by an executive order, but this lower court required the election commission to count ballots that came in late that were not properly marked, did not have return addresses or whatever they were supposed to have on the envelope, and order the count. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, their highest court, struck that down after the election, of course, several years later. But the Pennsylvania was not able to do that in 2024, and Trump won, and that presumably would be the case in 2028, that election. So he's got his work cut out for him if he's not going to bother to, and that's why I said it's not my job to help Democrats, but I hope they stick with that strategy, because it's going to be, that's not the way to win elections. You win the elections, as Margaret Thatcher said, you win the argument, then you win the vote. You're seeing that right now, actually, in England, where this Reform Party, Nigel Farage's party, went from way down, hardly any seats, and now this one, the argument they made about immigrant. First, for instance, he said Farage, he would presumably would be the prime minister if Reform Party wins, and he said he's going to support all the unlawful aliens. And right now, as it is, they went from just about nothing all the way up to the top. The Reform Party, by far, I think they're going to have, I don't remember the total number of seats in the Parliament, the British Parliament, but they would have 340 seats. They may be able to form a government. It's a parliamentary. I'm not going to explain how the parliamentary system works for everybody. Now I'll assume that but they may be able to form a government without having to ally with any other, to form a coalition with any other party, which would be great. And quite a turnaround, because that's what happened with the Labour Party. The Labour Party, they won this election overwhelmingly, and they were able to, I don't believe they had to work with any other party, and it's completely reversed. They are way, way down here. And the Reform Party is way, way up. And why? Because they followed Margaret, well, because they're British, I guess. They followed Margaret Thatcher's advice, and Nigel Farage, they won the argument. He also, another argument he won, and I'll end on this, was on Brexit. He was instrumental in getting Britain out of the European Union, which I guess I have to another side, because I've mentioned in the past, I voted for Trump given the alternative. I'm an independent, but I don't see myself voting for a Democrat at any time in the near future. And my lifetime, which I hope will be at least another 30 years. So there's that. But he's disappointed me in so many ways, and one of the ways is with the tariffs. He's putting the, I think, 15% tariff on everything that comes from England. We ought to have, that was supposed to be the reward for Britain leaving Brexit, or one of the things, the arguments that Farage made was a free trade. They would be able to make a separate free trade agreement with the United States, because they would not have to get the European Union. In other words, they would not be part of the European Union and have to have a vote of all, the permission basically of all the heads of the European Union, who are like von der Leyen. She's not elected. She was appointed. They're all appointed. None of those people at the top were elected. So it's a really screwy system, but very big disappointment that, I expected no less during the Biden administration that they would not follow through on this, but Trump should have. Don't get me, that will be a future vlog, and probably many future vlogs. He is, Scott Bessent was on, I just saw an interview with him, and I said, why isn't he telling Trump that we are paying his tariffs? Americans are paying the tariffs. And he just, I can't say I fell out of my chair because I have a standing desk. Almost fell over, maybe, I guess, or was tempted to sit on a chair and then fall out of it, because he said, well, the person questioned, I think it was Kristen Welker, somebody was asking him, do you admit that Americans are actually paying the tariffs? He said, no, the exporters to the United States are eating the tariffs. And that is such an absurd answer. I won't go into the details now, but just as a common sense, if they're eating the tariffs, that means that we are paying the tariffs, and they're just lowering their prices to offset that amount of tariffs. But who is writing the check to the Treasury? American companies are. And, well, I don't want to get off on another track here. I'll just say, I guess, preview of coming attractions, that if Bessent is assuming that when these foreign exporters eat the tariffs, that they are eating the entire amount of the tariffs. And that is not the case. some of them, they're not going to lose money, so they are going to eat as much as they can without losing, up to the point of where they would no longer make a reasonable profit that makes sense. So anything above that, then we are paying it, and there is no doubt that we are paying it. And for him to say that just really stunned me, and it tells me there's no hope in that. Trump has just really disappointed me on foreign affairs and tariffs, trade. Just great disappointment. But as usual, I got off on another track. I just want to say that my friends, if you're watching this, if you're a liberal watching this, tell Ken Martin, the head of your party, he's making a big mistake. If you can't, you should ask themselves, why can't you win the argument? If you're right, if your positions are so great, either you can't win the argument, or what I think is the case, they think we're all stupid. So stupid that if we don't agree with them, it's not that we don't disagree. It's not that we disagree. It's that we cannot understand. We're just too stupid. And if we could, if we were as smart as they were, then we would agree with them. That's basically what they're saying. Anyways, basically what I'm saying is that's it for today, for sure. That is it for today. Thanks for stopping by. Your comments always welcome in the comment section below the video. If you could subscribe, that would really be great. And you get to see much more of me going off on tangents. And that's why it's called Gene Rants. That's what a rant is. Just, shouting at the clouds. And it's me, old guy shouting at the clouds. But maybe I should rename it that, the vlog that, old man shouting at the clouds. Anyways, share this video with anyone you think would benefit from it. But most of all, come back and see me again. I'd love to see all of you again. And until I do see all of you again, bye.